Okay, welcome everyone again. This is the first lab session for the ACP course, and everyone already have the link to the course, right? To the lab session for today. It was in the material. I shared that on the group. The key thing was if you could try that, that's fine. If you could at least read the instructions well, also that's important, so that when we are going through it today, at least you have some sense of direction. Because with the time, we have 1 hour, 30 minutes, and the lab is 45 minutes, but if you factor in questions, we may take some time. So we'll do that lab. And then the other thing is we'll look at other questions people were asking. And if you have general questions also on the lab or on the console, we'll address. I don't know, how many people here have created an AWS account? I know Sesh has one. Any other person that here having an AWS account?
Yeah, I have an AWS account.
Okay, Herman has an account. That's Nuruddin. You have one as well?
Yeah, all of us here have an AWS.
Okay, that's good.
I have an AWS account.
Okay, Divine has one. Benny has one. Silas, do you have an account?
I haven't created one yet.
Haven't created. And Yembe, maybe not yet.
I could not access the information.
Yeah. Okay. But creating an AWS account, I mean from AWS itself. So it's a sign-up process. You may need a credit card. So yeah, welcome, Tatiana. Yeah. So good morning.
Why no? We don't say don't call it.
So I think, yeah, if it's a bit noisy in your end, just mute so that we don't have, let me see. Okay, good. So, right. So creating an account is quite, I will say it's not difficult, but if you have challenges, do let us know. I think just I'll check the YouTube video that we always share again for anyone who wants to create an account, and you can then look at it, right? And if you have challenges creating your account, just let us know. Yeah, just send a message and we'll address that. So enough about accounts, but let's go to the lab we have for today. So, which is the one I shared in the, where is my lab? The one I shared in the chat. I mentioned that in the course, we shared that as well. So everyone should at least know where the lab is. But if you don't, then I'll share it on chat. I expected that everyone should have read, look at the instructions on the lab, right? So let's go ahead and see what we can do. I'll share my screen so that we get started. Okay. Right. So I think it's just quite so here is the lab for today. I think it's just quite when you go to the instructions should be clear. So since this is your first lab, this is a very important site that I'll encourage everyone to be looking into it. It has a series of free labs that can be of use. I'll just go to the main page. If you just go to Amazon Quick Labs, you see different set of labs. You know, some of them are referred to as quests that you can do. So as we study and go along, we'll be coming back to this website to do some of these labs. But if you are already, I know some of you maybe are studying ahead and being adventurous, you know, you can always then come here to be able to work on different scenarios. The good thing about the labs here is there are some that are completely free. There are some that maybe you have to pay for them. But the good thing is you have the opportunity to work with the labs, and you don't need to have an AWS account, right? And you'll be able to do lots of things. You can work on Amazon S3. You see this, when you see a lab that needs 8 credits, that means you need to maybe pay for it, but there are some labs that are completely free, and that you can look into and also work with them. But so, like for example, the lab that we are doing today is a free lab, so you don't need to worry whether you can afford it or not. Yeah. So but the first thing you need to do is to sign into the lab, right? So I advise that everyone just have a Google a Gmail account. It will make your life easy in many other things that we do. So if you come to sign in with Google, if you're already signed into your account, you just immediately just click and sign in. So which is what I'll encourage you to then do. So if you sign in now, so if you're in your account, I'll encourage maybe if you have not done this, if you're doing this lab now, that's okay. Or if you can be doing as we go along, that is also okay. Yeah, Yembe, you are raising your hand. Go ahead. You have a question?
I'm not accessing your screen.
You cannot see my screen?
Yes.
Is that the same for everybody? Can everyone see my screen? Is there someone who cannot see my screen as well? Please talk. I think there are more than. Just unmute and say something.
I think it's there. I think it's just her.
You see the screen. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it seems maybe the problem is from your end, Yembe. You are using your let me see. I hope my volume is okay as well. Yeah.
Like I'm using my
It's
mobile.
very okay.
You're using
That's
your
fine.
mobile. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just go to the desktop now.
Yeah. I will say joining from Zoom, if you are using, it will always be best when you use your laptop, for example. Yeah. If you use your laptop, how can I say? Yeah.
Okay, sir. I'll just log in now.
Yeah. That will be better. Okay, good. So when you go to the lab, what I always advise is go ahead and just read the lab from start to end, right? Just read the lab. You have a good idea of what the lab is all about, so that when you come, you see you have just 45 minutes, so that when you are doing it, you should at least know what it is. You could spend 30 minutes just reading that. So this lab is about identity and access management, IAM. We'll be seeing how, we'll explore some users that are already created. We'll also see what permissions are given to those users. Remember, we did talk about policy. We'll also see about the concept of groups. And we'll see how we can, for each user, they will have different permissions or different policies. Like you see, there are groups for EC2 admin, EC2 support, S3 support. And what basically means is that each of these groups have different set of permissions. S3 is a service, simple storage on cloud. On AWS, EC2 is Elastic Compute Cloud. So it's used for creating EC2s. You'll learn more about EC2 next on Monday. So we're just going to see how to interact with the created users, to see how applying permissions on the groups and then trying to work with them, what that will mean. So that this is like a real life situation you can have maybe normally you could have like at a company where some people will have some permissions, some will not have some permissions. It's always important to separate those kind of things. So we'll look into that and then just see how that works. Another question someone asked last time was, when I did talk about IAM policy, if you need to always write that. So when in doing this, you're able to see that AWS have already created so many policies that you just take and use, right? You don't need to be bothered about writing them from scratch. But if there's a policy you need that is not available, then you can then create your own policy. But from the onset, there are so many policies you just go ahead and use. So policies, again, is just set of permissions. So did anyone have any questions so far before I start the lab so that we'll start working on it? Right, everyone is fine, that's okay. I hope that's okay. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, is it possible on my side to have two screens? I'm using a laptop. Is it possible to use have two screens to be working on one side, like following the practical my own self, like doing the practical my own self and following you at the same time?
It will be tricky, except if you were to set up two monitors at your end so that you have one monitor completely with what I'm doing and another monitor that you are using, right? It's a bit tricky, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So what I'll do, yeah, so I'll just try that, and if you are not able to do at the same time, then you can just watch as I go along step by step, get it, and then when you sit back later, you then try to do it, yeah. Okay, so the first step is I did sign in. So now, because if you don't sign in, you won't have this button here in green. You know, you notice that when I was just still logged in, when I just came to the page, this was gray. So when you sign into an account, this becomes activated, right? So what I can do now is I'm going to start the lab, and it will take some time to set up the environment that I'll be working on. So let's just hold on. As you see, it's provisioning lab resources. It will take a minute. Yeah. So again, just remember what IAM is. It's a web service that enables Amazon Web Service customers to manage users and permissions in AWS, right? And with IAM, you can manage the users, their security credentials, and things like access keys. Who remembers the two things that an access key will always have? When we did talk about access keys, who remembers what that was? Or at least some two things that you always talk of an access key ID, and what's the other one? We covered that in the notes. A secret key as well. So when you talk about access keys, you're always talking about an access key ID and a secret key. And these are like, you can see them also when you want to use programmatic access, right? When you want to use the command line, when you want to use the software development kit, that's the SDK, you always need access keys. But when you are going to the console, what do you always use? Those are different ways of accessing AWS. When you want to access through the Amazon console, what do you need to go? A username and password,
Email
right?
address and password, yeah.
Yeah, username and password. And in the case of the root user, the email address and password. I'm just trying to make sure that everyone is awake. So no one should miss. So now when you see the timer has started counting, right? So after I provisions, it will give me some information here. There's an S3 bucket. We have not done S3 bucket, but it's just know that it's just a storage service in AWS. There's an instance ID, it's compute. Just know that it's an EC2, just like a server. There's a password here. There's a region here. Remember when Niu was doing the global infrastructure, she pointed out that you always need to pick a region where you want to deploy your resources, right? So each time you go to the console, you always pick a region. If you want to put them in Europe, that's the first thing you have to ensure, to pick a region. So we'll need all these things as we go along. So it will be here, but then there is a button here to open the console. So you don't need to have your own AWS account to do this lab. The environment gives you a console that you can use. And if I click here, another window will come up. And okay, now it's complaining because I'm logged to my own account, my own personal account, and it requires that I should sign out before it can go. So let me just check that, and then we go. I want the mouse. Okay. Click here. Okay. So let me try again. And my console is not open. Okay, and now it looks, I think it's okay now. So I was logging to my own account. So when I did login, it did notice that it wanted me to put that off, but now it's okay. So all I did is after you have this, you click open console, a new window opens. It is this one, right? And this is how when you log into an AWS console, it looks like. Someone was asking, in the last session, someone did ask, how do you know which account you have logged into? If you look right here, you notice that in AWS always have what is something called an account ID, right? And then you have the user. So I'm logging into this. This is an automated account that was provisioned or that was created when I did click Start Lab. So I can always see what kind of user is logging in. So if it was a root account, you will know it immediately. So you can always look at this button to know where you are. And then to know which region you are, you can always see it from this other end. So I'm just trying to take you across some features in AWS. So you can see these are all the regions that AWS have. And there's one region here that is already in use. The US is 2, because if you go back to our lab, you see that it is the US West 2 that is being used for this lab. So if I come here, the US West 2 is the Oregon region, right? So that's how you know which account you are logged into, and you can always look at here to see which region where you are. So, but let's try to focus on the lab. So because if we don't finish in 40 minutes, we'll miss all of that. So let's look at, and then we can then talk about the different aspects of the console again later.
I have a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
When you want to do your labs, do you just have to come on this Amazon lab and then play with it, or you can play with the console directly?
When you say console, this is when you say console directly, do you mean your own personal lab?
Yes,
your own personal account.
I mean, on the console management using the IAM account, when I'm following the Stefan Marek tutorial, I don't really come through that. I just follow what he's doing then in a mirror on the other screen. But is it the same thing that can be done on this lab? Or? No.
For here, the instructions, what you can do here is only the things that are in this lab. Mm-hmm. If you, for Stefan Marek, if you are doing what is on Stefan Marek, you can use your AWS account. If you try to do what is in Stefan Marek course here, it will not go, right? It will not go, right. So this is the instructions here are just for this scenario. If you bring a different scenario, it will not work. Okay. Yeah, good. Okay, so let's go to. Let's just try to go to the task and see what we have. I've tried to kind of bring this is the console here on the right, and I've tried to have the instructions on this other side so that I try to, so that it's much more easier for everyone to see what we're doing. So these are the instructions. So let's look at the task, right? Explore user and groups. So it says, go to the AWS Management Console. On the services menu, click IAM. So I'll come here and I'll search for IAM. IAM is the Service Identity and Access Management. Remember, there are over 200 services, but we need to look at IAM. So I can go to IAM here, and it says in the navigation pane on the left panel, click users. The following IAM users have been created for you. So this account has some users created. So if I click on users, I'll see that the key thing is to identify that there's user 1, user 2, user 3. User 1, user 2, user 3, right? I think everyone can see that. Are we together? User 1, user 2, user 3. Everyone can see that, right?
Yes,
sir.
yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can.
Good. You can ignore these other ones. They are not for now important for this lab. So now it says click on user 1. It will show you the permissions tab, right? So let's look at user 1 and see what we have. So remember, you always create an IAM user. And then when you create an IAM user, for it to have permissions, you kind of, attach a policy to it. So it says when we click user 1, the permissions tab will be displayed. Notice that user 1 does not have any permissions. So what has happened here is this user 1 has been created and there are no permissions. And we have said that when you create a user, there are two things you always do when you are signing in. There's the authenticate and there's the authorize. Authenticate is when you can prove that you are user 1, let's say with the username and the password, but then authorize is the set of things you can do. So at the moment, user 1 has no authorization. It doesn't have any permissions, right? Then click on the groups tabs that's here. You see that it does not have, it's not a member of any group, right? You can always create groups and put users too. So this user 1 doesn't have permissions, it doesn't have groups. Click the security credentials. User 1 is assigned console password. So security credentials is here. And you see that user 1 has a console password. That means I can sign in to the console for user 1, okay? So in the navigation pane, let's also look at user groups. It says we should look at user groups. So again, groups is where you can collect different users. Let's say if you have, like in this case, they have EC2 admin, EC2 support, S3 support. So you have here EC2 admin support and S3 support. So this could be where you want that people who are maybe responsible for administering EC2, you put them in a group called EC2 admin. Then those who are just giving support, you know, they can give support, but they cannot do any administration task, you put them here. S3 support could be people who are managing the storage. S3 is just a storage for object storage in AWS. You will learn about that later. So if you could have 4 people or 5, or you have, you know, just depending. So these groups help for you to know exactly who you want to know exactly what it represents. So you always give group names that can make you easily identify what that group is for. So click the EC2 support group. So let's go to the EC2 support group, and this will bring you the summary for the group, right? So and then you see that users, the group doesn't have any user at the moment. If you go to permissions, you see that for EC2 support, this is a policy here. You see a policy name. Remember, a policy again is a set of permissions, right? So you have a policy here called Amazon EC2 read-only access, and it's managed by AWS. So this is what I was saying, that AWS have created already some series of policies that you can use. So this group called EC2 support is given a policy, Amazon EC2 read-only access. And that policy is one that was created by AWS. So the other thing is click on the EC2 read-only access. Under permissions tab, you will see the JSON file. So if we come on, let me see. Click on that. Okay, I don't want to. Okay, if we click on that, remember the JSON file that I did show the sample JSON file, right? So this is what this Amazon EC2 read-only access, this is how the JSON file would look like. So imagine if you are also learning how to write permissions, you can always copy this, take it somewhere, and then modify to suit what you want. But basically, this policy here is just a set of permissions, as you can see here, right? A JSON file, as we indicated in our class. And then I'm not going to go into this other part. Like I said, I expected that you should read. So I did explain what effect is. Effect can either be allow or deny. The action specify the API calls that can be made against the AWS, because action can be it can be different things. When you are reading if you are reading a file from, let's say, an S3 bucket, that's an action you can read. If you are let's say saving a file in an S3 bucket, you can write to that bucket, right? That's an action. So the effect can be allow maybe to read, and the action can be allowed to read, and then the resource you specify. When you see just a star, it means anything. So this is knowing in the practitioner level, knowing how to write a policy is not important, but I can only encourage you that, since I know most of you will not stop at a practitioner, there's nothing wrong trying to understand some of these things now, but you can then really read that on your own as well, right? Just for the sake of time, since we don't have much time here. Now in the navigation pane, let's go back to the user groups. And then we can click on S3 support as well. You see that S3 support will have, if you go to the permissions tab, you see that it will have S3 read-only access, right? And if you click on it also, you see that it gives you some kind of permissions that make up that policy. So if you go to the EC2 admin group, I'm on 17. So if we come back to user groups, and we go to EC2 admin, you also see the sort of permissions that it has, right? Let's see, admin now will be different. It has more kind of extended permission actions. Like you can see EC2 start instance, stop instance, because an administrator will have more permissions. Like he can start the instance, stop the instance. But when we did look at support, it was just more of like, seeing the instance. So let me just go back. If you look here, you see that the actions for the admins are more, right? I hope. Let me try to see if I can increase that. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, so the actions are more. And then, but if you remember when we did look at support, it was just more of basic, right? The permissions here is just one of describe, right? You can just describe. Describe means you can look at an EC2 and see what it is. So that's just exploring what we have. We have user groups, and then we have different users. And these users at the moment, they don't belong to any group. They don't have any permissions. We have users groups, and we have seen the permissions that are given to the groups. EC2 admin has more permissions and can do more than the support. And S3 is just to, support is just to read files on S3. Right. So now let's think of a business scenario so that you match this into a particular case in, let's say, in real life. So imagine your company is growing and is using Amazon Web Services and many EC2 instances and so many S3 storage, and you want to give access to new staff depending on their job function. So imagine a scenario of a company and with so many EC2s and S3 and all of this. So you can decide that if someone is joining the company and you want and is a person, maybe the function is just to handle S3 support, you want to put him into the group that belongs to S3. If the person is maybe working on EC2 support, you want to then just put the person into that group where he will have only these permissions. And the user, if he's maybe an admin, that means he can start and stop EC2 instances. You want to put him in the EC2 admin group. I think with this scenario, you start seeing the importance of groups, because then rather than taking each, when you have each person joining the company, you want to configure the person's credentials and then give the person permissions. It will be easier to just have one group, and all you need to do is create, just take the person and put into the group, right? So task 2 now is we want to put user 1 has been hired, and they will provide S3 support. So what we need to do now is to add user 1 to the S3 support group so that he should be able to carry functions that are for the S3 support. So all you need to do is go to users. I'm on 23 now. In the users tab, add user to group, right? So I'm going to go to user groups, right? I'm going to go to user groups, and then I'm going to go to S3 support. We are on user 1. And then I'm on the user tab here, and then I'm going to add users, right? In the users tab, click add users to the group. So now we are showing how to add users to a group. When I click add, I'll see the list of users that are in my system will come up here, right? And then I'll select user 1. Once I select user 1, I'll just click add users. And then user has been added, right? This, if you look at the top here, it will say you see that user 1 has been added to the group. Now add user 2 to the EC2 support. So I'll do the same. I'll go to user groups. I'll go to EC2 support. Please, am I too fast? Just to be sure.
No, Master, the page is normal.
Okay, the page is normal. Thank you. Right, I just want to, so now we're adding a user to group 2. So I'll come to add users. We're adding user 2, right? So I'll click user 2, and I'll add user 2 to the group. So we'll see that it now belongs to that group. So if I come now to user 3, I want to add user 3 to EC2 admin, right? So I go back to the groups. This is EC2 admin, and I'll click add users. So I'm taking the user 3, right? User 3 should go to the admin group, and I'll add that. Right, so if you notice now very well, if we go to users group, you see now that each group here, right, has 1 user, and we added 1 user to each of that. So what we'll need to do now is try to see how this works. And there is we'll need to sign in and test the users. So what will happen is I'll sign in as maybe, for example, user, let's say user 1 was S3, I'm sure. I'll sign in as user 1 and see what kind of permissions I have, right? Remember, user 1 can be able to sign in, which is authentication. And because I've given user 1 some permissions, it is now authorized to do certain things. It's now authorized, for example, to work with S3. So let's see. Let's go to that. So now, in this task, you will test the permissions of each IAM user. In the navigation pane on the left, click dashboard. An IAM user will sign-in link is displayed. It will look something similar. This link can be used to sign in to the AWS accounts you are calling. Copy the IAM user sign-in link. So let's go to the dashboard, and then we'll see the IAM. Let's see. In the from the left, click dashboard, and IAM user sign-in link is displayed. Where is that again? It should be. Normally, it should come at the top here. Where is this dashboard?
I think because you've minimized the page, yeah, that's it.
That's it. Thank you. Yeah. So, right. So I just had to scroll, and then I see it here. So sign in the URL. So this is the link here. You see an IAM user I have here an IAM user sign-in link is displayed. It will look similar to this. So this is what I need, right? I need to copy this. It will not be this, it will be similar. So I can see that, I'll copy that. This link can be used to sign in the AWS account you are currently using. Copy that link, and then I'll keep it somewhere because I'll be needing it as we go along. And what is important here is open a private window. What this means is a private window is you just need to have a complete. What I'll do is I have two type of browsers here. If I open a private window, is sometimes referred to as a cognito window. So if you are using Chrome, this is what you do. You can always come to click on the new incognito window in Microsoft, depending on the browser you are using. But what I'll do is to make it very simple, I have another browser. So you can either open another window, but you should make sure that if you are using Mozilla Firefox, you follow the instructions here. Or if you have two browsers, that's even better, right? You just click on that browser. So I'll open the Firefox to sign in, because it will give some kind of, so let me see just a moment, but I want to make sure that you still see the instructions. Okay, right, so I'll open a new window here, and I'll use user one. User is user-1, and the password is the one that we have here. Remember, there's a password here. I'll copy that password, and then I'll paste it. That's what I'm signing into. Then I'll sign in. I should be able to sign in. Right, so sign to the console. But what I want you to remember again is, remember the role of user one, right? If you remember our business scenario, user one is S3 support. It has been given permissions to read only access to Amazon S3, right? So just keep in mind, just keep that in mind. So I'm on user one. So we're here, I've just signed in as user one. And it says in the service menu, click S3. So this is user one. I can go to services. I can then always search for S3. I can click on S3. And then it will come up. So let's wait for that to load up. To load. So click the bucket that has S3 bucket in its name. So you learn more about, for now, it's just remember again, S3 is a storage, and you learn more about S3 in the sessions to come. So we have here, it says that we should click the bucket that has S3 storage in its name. So which one is that? A bucket is just like a container where you put different, you then store objects in. So if I'm on this one, where is S3 in its name? Okay,
the middle one.
Is the middle one? Yeah, right. Okay, this is it. Yeah, so this is the one. Thank you, Desmond. So this is the bucket that has S3 in its name. So let me just, it's the middle one. This one. So I will then click on that bucket, and yeah, I'll be able to see what's there. So so I'm able to access that bucket. The name of your bucket is also located in the left. Since you are a user of part 3, you are able to see that, right? So the reason is because why I'm able to, you then see that I'm able to access that bucket because I have S3 support, right? User 1 has S3 support. That is the permissions that have been given to user one. But now there's another part of this now is now test whether they have access to Amazon EC2. So as a quick question, what do you think? Will user one have access to EC2?
They were not granted permission.
I don't think so.
Yes, he was not granted
No,
permission.
it doesn't belong to that group.
Right. It doesn't belong to that group. So let's see what that will mean, right? Now test whether they have access to Amazon EC2. So EC2 is a service. You'll learn more about that next week. So let's try to go to the EC2 service and then see how that will look like. So let me go back to services, or I come here and I search your EC2. So I click on EC2. Right. Navigate to the region where your lab was launched. Remember again, I just explained why you always make sure that we are on US East 2, so we shouldn't worry. But I've gone to EC2, so what I need to do is, it says that navigate to the region. We have done that already. So what I need now is in the left panel, select instances. So I'll try to see if I can access instances, but you can already start seeing from here, there's something here saying API error, right? You are seeing all these errors. But if I click on instances, it will even be even more clear. You see, you are not authorized to perform this operation. So this is going to just confirm that the permissions are actually working. User one can only work with S3 buckets. And because of the permissions given, you can see that user one cannot do any actions here as confirmed, because doesn't have that. But you can also see from here, once you start seeing these errors, you always know that it's likely going to be something that has to do with permissions. Right? So we have taken user one, we have seen that it can access S3. We have seen that if it tries to go to EC2, it will not be able to do anything because the permissions that was given doesn't work, right? So let's try to use user two. Let's try to sign in as user two and see what's going to be the difference. I think someone needs to meet. Let me sign out. I'm still on that browser, but what I'll do now is I'll log in back as user two. User two. The password is the same. I
have a question immediately.
That's fine.
Concerning the browser, are we using the browser immediately in our screen, or we go to external browser?
You mean the one in the lab?
No, I mean the one that the browser you just you just went into now to sign in as user two.
Yes. When you say the browser in your screen, I think I didn't capture your question. Well, can you repeat that again? Let me hear.
Earlier you talked about we have to go to a browser, maybe Microsoft or.
Okay. Yes. If you have two browsers installed on your system, right, you can use one browser, which was for doing the lab. Like you see, I had this one. This is the main one. Right, but when you want to sign in as user two, you need to open another. If you are using the same browser, let's say you had just one browser, there are some instructions that were given at the top on how you can open a tab in a private mode, right? But the other alternative way of doing it is if you have another browser installed in your system, you can just start fire up and use that one. So the instructions of how to open a browser in a private mode is given in the lab above. It's just that I didn't want to go through that, so I opened a complete different browser. This is Firefox and this is a Chrome browser. Yeah, so you can use a different one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so I've signed in as user two, and let's remember user two was given what kind of permissions? I think we can see that user 2 was hired. You have user 2 who has been hired as Amazon EC2 support. So you are going to put user 2. User 2 is having permissions where he can only view, right? Remember, this is different from Amazon EC2 admin, where you can stop and you can start. So I've signed in as user 2. And remember that in the services menu, let's see what I can do. So if I go to EC2, when you use services, they'll start coming up here. Like you see, recently visited services. So no need to come and search here. What I can do is I can just see that I have EC2 here. I can just click on it, right? So I'll click on EC2. Or if you wanted, you can still search here, but there's a shortcut since we can easily see it. So once you sign in, you can see that navigate to the region where your lab was launched. That we don't need to, we are sure it is Oregon. And then on the navigation plane on the left, we can click on instances, right? So if I click on instances, you see, we are able to see now instances. This is an instance is just as a virtual server or virtual machine here, right? So remember that when we use user 1, we did have permissions error, right? So, but here at least because user 2 has the permissions, he's able to see that instance itself, right? The instance should be selected. So let's try to see now. You are now able to see the instance, but you have only read-only permissions. However, you will not be able to make any changes. I cannot do any changes on this instance. I can see it because I'm only qualified to work as support. But here is one thing. If we try to stop the instance, and this is where how you can stop an instance, I can select the instance, and then I can go to the instance state. You see, this is the instance state, and I try to stop it, for example. Let's see, and I see, ask me, is that true? Stop it means like shutting it down, and you see it fails, right? This is an error message. You are not authorized to perform this operation. Why is user 2 not able to do this?
Because it's not the
So he has access
only
only to read.
Right.
Only me have access.
Yes, all of you are correct. I had so many answers. All of them are correct. So he has only read, only an admin can do that, and user 2 doesn't have that. So it shows that the permissions are working, right? And then also the other thing is, if I try to go to S3, will I be able to see that? Will I be able to access S3 if I'm user 2?
No.
Yes, that's correct, but it's just that let's see, because again, user 2 has been given what permissions? EC2 permissions, right? He has not been given permissions to work with S3, so he will not also have that permission. If you look at this, I've gone to S3, and it's telling me no buckets. Let me see. So if I come to buckets, remember that when it was user 1 was able to see 3 buckets, right? But user 2 says no buckets, but click on S3, you receive error because user 2 does not have permissions. So that's why I'm surprised. I was expecting a different error message, but let's see. But the first thing is I cannot even view. I can't see any bucket here, but we know very well that there are buckets in here. So yeah, you can't see any buckets. And if you notice here, everything is blurred. You cannot create, you cannot delete, you can't do anything here because you don't even have permissions to do anything on the bucket, right? So that's just an highlight, although the instruction, the steps here say something else, but the other thing you can observe is you can't do anything here. So let's try to sign in as user 3 and see. User 3 has permissions to work as an admin, and let's see what that will mean. So I'm signing back as user 3. Okay. So I'm user 3. I'm using the same password here. So I think someone was asking me for the password some point. So this way you get that password. So so now as user 3, we are still on the region. That's the good thing, is US is 2. I can go to instances. So I can go to the EC2. Remember, I have that I've recently visited here. So it's listed here. So I go to EC2. And then what I can do is I can go to instances. So I can click on instances. I'm an administrator. So as an administrator, I'm able to see the instance, right? And then now it's trying to ask me if I can stop that instance. So in the instance state menu, click stop instance, right? So let's try and see as an admin if I can stop the instance. So that's instance state. I try to stop the instance. Let's see if it will work. Okay, you see, successfully stop the instance because it has the admin, it has the instructions to stop that. So basically, we can see that user 3 can be able to stop the instance. User 2 was not able to do that because had only read-only permissions. And then the user 1 was working with S3 and could not even do anything, right? Could not even see what the instances are. But again, will user 3 be able to see S3 bucket if user 3 try to?
I think yes.
We are talking about user 3. Right?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Yes,
He has access because of admin.
Admin for what exactly? Admin for but let's try and see. Then we explain.
Admin for EC2, so he won't have the access.
Okay, that's another answer. So which is good. Let's try to look and see whether I will have access, and then I'll explain why we have that scenario. So we are in buckets. Again, as you see, cannot do anything. Almost nothing.
Yep.
Right. So let me explain. So let's go back. But before that, before I explain that, since we still have 6 minutes before this lab expire, at least let me go back to user 1, right? And then so that but just keep in mind that user 3 does not have access to S3. And then let me sign into user 1. Then we talk about that first, so that I can show you the difference of that we'll have. So if I go to S3 for user 1, okay, you see user 1, you see all the buckets, right? And you see this option to create. Remember that for user 2, we did not have any possibility, right? User 2 and user 3, you couldn't create anything. And then if you were, since you see the bucket, if you click on it, you can then these other options are activated. But for user 3 and user 2, all of this was blurred and you could not even access anything, right? But what I want to point out, I know some of these instructions are always a bit, maybe they needs to be updated. Remember that instead on the instructions, you expect to see error access denied, but we don't see that error, but we can clearly see that we can access the bucket. Now, even though, remember that now why user 3 cannot access the bucket, because AWS services, they are all different and independent from one another. EC2 manages the permissions for EC2 are just for EC2. So if you are an admin for EC2, your permissions are only limited to EC2, right? But S3 is a complete different service. If you are for you to be able to manage and do everything in S3, you have to be an admin for the service S3. So just because you are admin in one service, it does not mean that you will now be able to be admin for the other service. So just keep in mind that AWS services are all they are all different, and the permissions that surround them are different. And just because you are an admin for one service does not mean that you are admin for the other. And a general, but there is an IAM user that can have admin privileges for all the services, and that is what you create when you sign in as a root user. You always create an admin that will have. I'll show that since we have enough time. I think I'll show that you can create an admin that can have privileges over all the services. But you can then decide to create other users that will have admin only for particular services. Like in this case, user 3 was given admin only for the EC2 service. User 1 was given permission to read only the S3 service. I don't know if that explains why user 3 is not having permissions for S3. Why user 3 is not having permissions for X3. Any question in regards?
Understood, sir.
That's clear, right? Okay, understood. Thank you. So the other thing is, if you now, I can leave this one. So if we go back to our users, I wanted also to show that if you look at, and to show that if you look at user 3, so just to explain that more, but remember that you can also create a user that can have permissions on 2 services, because it does not mean that it has, if you create one user, it can have permission to just one service. Like I said, you can have an admin user that have permissions over all the services. You can also create a user that can have permissions, can have access to EC2 as well as S3. So if you look at the policy for EC2 admin, if you notice the action it has is only EC2 start instance, EC2 stop instance, and other ones. If you wanted to add S3, you can then also add, let's say if you are creating your own separate policy, you could create EC2 and S3 admin policy. And then what you need to do then is create actions in this policy that will be the ones that reflect S3, how you want S3 to be. So you then add another statement, right? But again, as I say, don't be, for the practitioner, knowing how all of this work, it's not important, but it's not difficult to understand as well. So let's say I'm not going to change this. If I wanted, you see there's a possibility to edit the policy. The funny thing about the labs on quick labs is that when you try to do something more than the instructions given, your account can always be then suspended. So what I advise is don't try to do more than you have, right? I'm just trying this just to see. Okay, you see, I hope it doesn't push me out. But if I'm on a normal AWS account, I can do more than this. And I think that's what I will show. But I think I've explained enough regarding why we don't have the user 3 being able to access S3. And I have 33 seconds. I think we can lock that out. But remember, the key thing was to go through the lab so that you, since it's recorded, you see how you can execute it. So if you are doing the lab on your own, since the recording will be shared, you can then always stop and see where you are having difficulties, right? So the time has run out. So, but do you, any questions in regards to the lab, or let's just discuss if there are questions in regards to the lab before we look at other things. Is it a straightforward lab or is it a difficult one? This is our first lab, right?
Hello, good morning, everybody.
Yes, good morning.
Sorry, I joined later with the network troubles we have in Bamenda.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yes, so I started following behind and I missed out on a lot. And with my lab, I still have like 24 minutes. I don't know if what is there in the program. Maybe I could share my screen and then you guide me through, maybe if any other person did not get everything, so that maybe with my trial we could catch up.
Yeah, 24 minutes. As you know, the lab has been recorded, right? So I'll upload that on the YouTube channel, and then if there are some things that you are missing, you will be able to see from it. But let me just see if there are other questions before we come back, because yeah, I did go through a number of steps, but let's just see if there are other questions before we go back to that. Yeah.
All right.
Since that's why I record the lab, so that if you can then sit back and watch the lab on the recording, and then you can then try to do yours again. And if you have questions, then just share that on chat. I'll try them to follow up. Yeah, that will be better. But any other questions before I show other things regards to IAM?
Yes, please. I have a question.
Yes, can you go ahead?
Okay, in this case, we are using a console with pre-created users. Like we were just adding the users to various groups. So what is it like in a normal situation? Do we have to create the users? If yes, how do we do that?
Okay, right. So user creation. So I'll just go to my own. Let me open my own console. Let you see that. I did sign in early on, but I was kicked out when we started. So let me sign in. And while I'm doing that, any other question that maybe I could be answering while we do that?
I just want to ask, is if I want to run the lab on my own, is it okay to skip like the first, I think from like step 1 to 20 and just go down to the business scenario?
Yeah, yeah, because if you read the instructions, right, it's possible, because step 1 to 20, right? Because it's just explaining everything, right? But I'll say, yeah, if you have already read it, maybe because I think maybe it's time and you're afraid not to get lost, because step 1 to 19 is trying to explain everything. So if you come just to the business scenario, yeah, you can, because that's where you really start doing something. Yeah, you can do that. Okay, let me sign into my own account. Let's work on that. That will be better. My own normal AWS account. So I'm not going to use my root user. Remember, you always sign in the first time as a root user, then you create a separate IAM user and give admin privileges. I have an admin called com-admin, and then you can sign into it. So it's asking for my account ID, which I have it. So this is, I have it here. I know it's 2 something. Right, so normally when you have an account, an AWS account, you will always have an ID, right? So the password is already there. But then remember, we did talk about multi-factor authentication, and remember, I did talk about Twilio. It's an example. So you see the code will always be changing. It's 16 seconds for this to expire, but I can then copy that to copy this. So this is a code I have. So remember, MFA is something you have, right? So I can sign them into my own console. And if you notice, this is com-admin. So the question is, Kenya was asking is, how do you see that on a normal console? So I can come to my IAM console here. And if you notice, I have 4 users that I've created, and I have MFA activated for all those users. So I can come to users, and let's say I want to create another one. I can create a user here called, let's see. I'll create a user called WeFun. Just say WeFun user. So that's just how you can do that. You just type a username, that's all you need. And then I can choose, there are two, you can select the credential types. I did talk about the access key, right? And I said access key is made up of access key ID and secret access key. And when do you use access keys again? I'm repeating that question this morning. When do you use access keys? Who can remember? When you want to access AWS services using what? There are three ways to access the AWS services, right?
Console.
Right, there's management console. What are the other ones? What are the other two? I know you people know why everyone is on mute.
There is IAM.
No, the ways to access AWS services. IAM is the service for that. There are three ways.
Have SDK and
yes,
SDK and SL.
SDK and SDK.
CLI.
CLI. Yes, CLI.
Yes, good. Remember that is in our. I was advised that everyone has that that diagram in mind, right? So there are three ways to access AWS. You have the. Let me see. I always want to. This is something that is always very recurring, especially in the practitioner. And you really have to remember that you should not forget that, right? So I want to just bring that up so that everyone sees this diagram. And if you can always have the diagram in your head, you do yourself a lot of good, right? Right, so this is AWS. There are three ways to access AWS. You have the AWS CLI, which is command line interface. You have AWS SDKs, this software development kit. And you have the AWS console, which is the graphical user interface. The graphical user interface is what we are working on now, right? This is what I'm using now. And to use the graphical user interface, I always need a username and a password, right? But to use the command line or this a software development kit, I always need the access keys. And that's why if I'm creating a user like here, where is my screen? Right, so I'm creating this user. It asks me what credentials types do I need? Do I need access key or do I need password or do I need both? Now, if I choose access keys, it means that if I want to access it through CLI and SDKs, the user will be able to do that, right? And if I choose password, it means I can only go. So there are always this option. I can choose to use both of them, right? Which is almost normal. And then if you choose them, you can then say, okay, for console password, you can choose a particular password. I don't know what to type here, but let me just say, on Cloud 2020, right? So that we should remember. So, so I can create a user. So the step is this: how you can create a user. You can create a user. You can give, say, you have access keys. That's for programmatic access. Always remember that's the word that you always use. If you are going to do programmatic access, you need access keys. So and then I have the password here. And once I have that, I don't want the user to change the password. Something is still lacking with one. I mean, okay, it refuses that the password does not conform to the policy, right? I need to have a more complex password. So let me try again. Okay, now it's more complex. Now I'm able to create that user. So I'm creating with a user. I've put a password. The next thing is in creating the user, it will ask me what permissions do I have to give this? Do I want to give this user, right? So if I click next permissions, this is where I can decide that I want to copy admissions from, I want to attach existing permissions, right? There's an option here that says attach existing permissions. And as I explained earlier, AWS have already created some permissions that you can always use, right? This is what is called AWS Manage Permissions. So I can come, one of them is called administrator access. So if I give this with one user administrator access, it means that he will be able to have access to all the services in this account, right? But not as more, but will still be limited because there are some things that only the root user can do. For example, if you want to delete your account, you need the root account. You need the root user. So I can decide and just pick the administrator access, or I can decide to simplify. Maybe I want this user to just be, if you see there are different sort of permissions here. Let's say maybe database administrator. I think there is a policy from AWS that is just for database, Amazon RDS data full access. So maybe I want to give RDS is relational database, or so these are all sorts of policies. And okay, you see this database administrator, this one is much more easy to recognize. So maybe I want to give this user just to be a database administrator, right? So when you're creating a user, you always have this possibility to choose what you want the user to do. But let me choose permissions for the administrator access. And the next thing is you can give tags, but it's not compulsory. You'll learn about tags next time, later on, but let me not go into that now. I can review, and review means I've given a user call with one user. I've given him, I noticed this policy was picked up. Well, I'll just leave both of them. I've given permissions for administrator and database administrator and administrator access. So he has 2 permissions, and then I can go ahead and create the user, right? So that's how you create a user in AWS. But remember that in creating this user, I did give the user permissions. In the other case that we were watching, we had the user was created and the users didn't have permissions. But remember that it's always better if you have many users to put them in groups, and then you can be able to always give permissions. Let me see. Someone was asking, where do I get the password? Right. So when you enable start the lab, the administrator password will always appear on this corner, right? If you play this video later on, you'll see when I upload it, you'll see the administrator password. So it's always loaded when you start the lab, right? Can you use different browsers? Sorry, I was not looking at so I missed some questions. You can use different browsers. Yeah, I don't know if I'm okay. Right. Okay. So I've covered that. So that's how you can create a user. So if I go now back to my IAM. Let me open that in a different window. You'll be able to see that we have a user call with one user, and I can actually go out and log in with that user. Right, so now I have 5 users. I hope I did explain that to you. Kenya, you got that right? So there's with one user here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, and that's how you attach permissions also to your user. Any other question in regards to IAM? No questions, right? So in general, so let me see. So when you sign into AWS, you always have the console. I've explained I already show the concept of, remember we always select a region where you want to maybe deploy your workloads. It could be application or whatever thing you want to do. The first thing is you must always pick a region. And then to always know whether you are signing as a root user or a normal user, you can always check from here. And every AWS always account always have an account ID. That's the thing that's always stated first. If you notice when I'm trying to sign in, it will ask me I should give the account ID. So you need to know your account ID. Then you need to know your username and you need to know your password. And then if you have Authy for your MFA, then you always need to provide the code that you have running to be able to log in. Yeah. Okay.
Hello, Ban.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know if this question is really necessary. But when we look at this EC2, I just want to be sure with the definition. It says elastic compute cloud.
Cloud, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so the 2 there is representing the CC, Uda.
Yes, it's representing the C, right?
Okay.
Yes. So it's just a short form that AWS tried to give, rather than you saying Elastic Compute Cloud all the time, they did meet it then with the 2, so EC2, yeah. That's just the name, yeah. And you'll notice that with S3 is simple storage as well. Simple, what's the full name again? Who remembers? Let me see. S3 full meaning has to do with 3S. Let me see. Simple storage service. So S3 stands for simple storage service. So rather than always saying simple storage service, they just put 3. So it's S3 times, right? But you learn about those services later as well. So then you know more of that. But just so you see some of those names in AWS will come like that. Yeah. And one funny thing is at times, like you see, you easily remember the short form than the long form often because you tend to use the short form often. Okay. So any other general questions? If there are not questions for the lab, we can have general questions. I know some of you are studying and going ahead, so I see you have all of that. Let me see. If not general question, what is it I had to point out? I remember I've shown already how to figure out which account you are using. I've created a user, and you can create a user group the same, right? It's not creating user groups. Okay, let me just share my screen again. Maybe since we have created a user and attached permission, let's also create a user group. So if I come to user groups, right? At the moment, I have a group here, administrators, but let me just create a group called, I can come here. Let me just call a group called WeFund Cloud Storage. Maybe I want people from WeFund Cloud who can work on storage. I just can, then maybe to be specific, I can call admin, I can say WeFund Cloud Storage. But to be more specific, let's say WeFund Cloud S3 admin, right? So these are people who will be managing S3 on WeFund Cloud. So I call a group like that. I'm not attaching. So since, okay, let me go ahead and attach S3. Let's look for a group for S3. I'm sure there is a group for S3 here. Right, so I can give full S3 access. So let's attach S3 permissions to that group, and then I can go ahead and create a group. So let's see. So it's just that easy. So a group will be created called WeFund Cloud S3 admin. And if I click on that group, just like we did on the one on the lab, I can come to permissions, and I can see that on permissions, it has Amazon S3 full access, and that's how it is written, right? And yeah, so I have these permissions for it. So that means if I create a user, let's come to user and decide that, okay, let's create a user, and we say there's someone joining WeFund Cloud, and he will require to be running S3 in WeFund Cloud. So maybe that user is, I don't know, is Barry, and we'll give her console access because you sign through console, will allow auto-generated password. We will not give permissions, right? We'll just leave the user as it is. And the reason why we have not given permissions is because we know that we want to put that user into our S3 into that group. So I'll just have that user created, and then I'll just come back to groups. And then while I'm in groups, I will use with on cloud S3 admin, just like we did in the lab. And I'll come to we have users here. We want to add users to that group. We'll have add users, and then I can pick the user we have created. We'll add it to that group. And remember, when you put a user to this group, what happens is they inherit the permissions of the group, right? So that's how you can create users, and you can then also put them back into groups, and then they will inherit the permissions you have given the group. And that's the reasons for groups, right? As we did cover in the lecture. Yeah. Okay. Any question?
We have almost gone through almost everything, but I haven't heard something about IAM rule.
Yes, go ahead.
So how can they create a rule here? Because on our previous class, they were talking about rules being that any person can, when we talk about rules, anybody in the group or in the cloud can access a specific rule at any time.
Can assume the rule, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that make sense?
Right. So remember again, a rule is another identity, right? So if you notice, thanks for that question, because yeah, we've covered groups, we have covered users. So rules could have been something we should look here. So this is how you just come again to rules, and you can come to create a rule. And to create a rule, remember a rule is used when you want, for example, another AWS service to communicate to another service. A good example could be that you have created an EC2 instance. Apologies, I keep talking about EC2 instance, but I know you are still going to cover that next week. But just have in mind that it's just another service in AWS, and you want, let's say, this EC2, which is an instance, to maybe access an S3 bucket, right? And S3, so the reason could be, for example, like you have an EC2 instance and you have a web server running on it, and that web server has to display some pictures. But these pictures, you have stored them in an S3 bucket. So for EC2 to be able to access the S3 bucket, you can then create a rule and give permissions to that rule that says that if the EC2 take this rule, the EC2 will be able to access those pictures stored in an S3 bucket, so that if someone accesses the website through that is running on EC2, EC2 should be able to display them. So, and that's just exactly what comes up when you want to create a rule. So I've clicked create a rule, and the first thing is saying, okay, allows AWS service like EC2, Lambda, or others to perform actions in this account. So I want an AWS service, and a common use case, I will say I want to use it for EC2. So I want EC2 to do something on my behalf, right? So I'll pick the service here. I'll pick the instance I want to give here. The common use case is EC2, and I'll just go to next. And then I'll try to give permissions, right? What do I want, right? So in this case, yeah, I want to give it the policy to access, say, S3, right? So you can then maybe give the permissions straight from here, or you can create your own policy, right? Depending on what you want. So for example, let's just say this is not something, this is just for demonstration purposes. So if I pick S3, I'm coming to your question, Divine. So let's just pick S3 here. And I say, I want it to just have full access. Normally, you will not give an EC2 full access to S3, but for demo purposes, let's just do that. I want it to have full access. Then I need to give a name to the role, and you always try to give a role a name that explains what you are doing. So, right, we say EC2 full S3 access, so that when you see the role, you'll know exactly what it is, right? So I've given the permissions, and I'll just create the role, right? So the role is being created. So it's taking, as you can see here, it's running. So creating the role. So that's how you create a role, right? You pick what you are trying to do. I mean, you best understand roles when you work with them, because so I encourage you to there's a lab, but with time, just be patient. I'll say for the role, just be patient. When we cover EC2 and we cover S3 storage, there are some labs that cover working with EC2 and S3 where you need to create roles. Then that could be a suitable lab that you can do, so that I don't rush you a lot ahead. So what was the name I gave my role again? It was EC2 full access. So if I come to EC2 full access, I can search for it here. So now I have a role called EC2 full access. So this is a role I've created, and I can use it at any time, right? I can use that at any time and do, right, I'm going to, so I can use that. And an example of, let me just go a bit ahead for those of you who may be already ahead. And sorry, it's okay, this one was leaving. It's almost top of the hour, but I've created a role called EC2 full access. And for example, let's say if I wanted to give that role to an EC2, so I have an EC2 here, that is running. Let me just go to it and you see how I can do that. But as I say, when we cover EC2 next week and then do S3, there will be a lab that I will bring up that we can do how to actually create a role and do all of this. So if I come here, I can come to security, I can come to modify IAM role, and I can now go and look for that role that I created, EC2 full access, and I can then update IAM role. So I'll then give this EC2 the role that I created. So that means now this EC2 assume that role, and then now EC2 will be able to have access to an S3 bucket that I can then give to that EC2. So that's how you can create a role, assign it, for example, here to EC2, so that you can use it to assume to, and because it has permissions to S3, you can able to do that. Did I cover all your, I hope I covered your question already, yeah?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, but be patient. When we do EC2 and storage S3, we'll do an interesting lab that covers all of this, and I'm sure you'll like that much better. Now I've just kind of explained. Okay, we are almost top of the hour, but I see Divine did type that looking at the image of interacting with AWS, there are terms under each method, which is a bit confusing, like CLI, terminal, SDK, using codes management, console. So what's terminal, using codes, and GUI? Okay, I understand very well. At the beginning, everything will look very intimidating and at times like just too much, but yeah, asking questions like you do will help you, right? So this, what you are seeing now on the screen, this is the graphical user interface. Graphical user interface means, please can you mute? I think I can hear myself back, right? Just mute if you are not doing anything, if you are not speaking. I'll mute everyone. So this is the graphical user interface. What you have now is a graphical user interface. There is something known as the command line interface, which you will learn more. I have that, like for example, you have to, that's something you will learn more, especially when you do the next course, but it does not mean that you can try to see how that does now. But command line interface is where you don't see anything, you just work with commands. Like if you notice here, I have the AWS CLI installed on my computer. So for example, I can be able to go and type AWS commands, right? Like you see, I've just typed AWS and it will ask me what I want to do. I can say AWS help, and then it will tell me all sorts of possible commands that I can use, right? So I can then read all, this covers all AWS services. Again, it looks too much, but many people don't use all these commands. They use just what they need, right? So depending on what I need, I can then go ahead and say, okay, maybe if I want to work with S3, there may surely be a command for S3. So I have to type, give an option, or you see, I didn't give much. So if you make an error, it will tell you. But you will learn. I'm just trying to show that this is what is called the command line interface. You just type commands, and that is what many people prefer. And of course, you will come to realize as you study and go ahead that you will not be using the graphical user interface. SDK, that is also interestingly an environment that I have not used. I've worked with the command line, I've worked with graphical user interface, but yeah, it's another option that you can use. But I want what all of you should always remember for the practitioner, know that if you want to do programmatic access, you need to use the command line interface. You can use the CLI or the SDK. And to use the CLI or SDK, you need to have access keys. But when you are using just the graphical user interface, you use the username and the password, right? So those are the key things you can always make sure you remember for at least for the practitioner. You can know more, but you should know these basics, as I indicated here. It's very important. Okay. Right. I think that was it. We should leave it here, I think, right? Any other questions? I will send the recording, and if you didn't follow, you can then be able to look into it, and then yeah, and if you have questions, make sure that you even if you follow and you are not able to go through on the YouTube or upload and share, just ask your question and then we'll follow from there. Let me stop recording.